And then that's when that crazy woman started screaming, remember, with the glasses?
United States of America, Donald.
I wonder whatever happened to her. She's probably... I just wonder where she is right now.
For their gracious aid
I am so sorry to my world. I am so sorry to my world. This is not what we want.
2 nights out, and security is already very tight across the district. Fencing has gone up at several different locations, and law enforcement agencies have been preparing for months for the possibility of civil unrest. News 4's Mauricio Casillas looks into some of the security measures that are in place as concerns over political violence linger.
A city bracing for what could be a tumultuous time. Fencing being reinforced outside the White House in Lafayette Square Sunday night. A similar scene outside the vice president's residence, the Naval Observatory. Some downtown businesses also fortifying by boarding up their windows ahead of the election. And security measures in place at Howard University, where Vice President Kamala Harris will hold her election watch party. For some we spoke with, it's hard not to feel a sense of tension.
Seeing temporary fencing go up around the White House and other nearby government buildings is feeling a little dystopian. So, there's definitely, the temperature is up in our country today, and it'll be an interesting week.
I do feel a little bit of unease just in general. I think everybody's just a little bit on edge regardless of where you fall politically. And I think people are just in a wait and see kind of mode.
But I want to be very clear. We will not tolerate any violence of any kind. We will not tolerate any riots. We will not tolerate the destruction of property. We will not tolerate any unlawful behavior. Offenders will be arrested and will be held accountable.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. We have to continue to talk about election predictions because everybody is making predictions about what is going to happen tomorrow on election day. Is Kamala going to win? Is Trump going to win? By how much is Kamala going to win? Or by how much is Trump going to win? Nobody really knows, right? But one thing that I found to be very easy to predict before going into the election was the fact that liberal cities would be boarding up in anticipation for this election, in anticipation not for Kamala Harris winning, but for Kamala Harris losing, okay? Because history has shown us that liberals do not take losses very well, especially when it comes to Trump, okay? In fact, I just want to remind you guys of what happened in 2016 after Trump won the election, in which Hillary Clinton and Democrats did not like the outcome. They didn't really accept the outcome. And as a result, liberals committed acts of violence. They rioted, and there was a lot of chaos and destruction.
Not my president! 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 The whole world is watching! The whole world is watching! Trump! 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 No KKK, no fascist USA! No Trump! No KKK, no fascist USA!
All of a sudden, the police officers started to spray pepper spray, and they got our audio technician. They're going to see us running because they're going to throw more flashbangs. The chaotic scene just blocks outside the secure area of the inauguration and parade route.
I personally have anti-establishment slants, but I don't think that this is anything that I want to be a...
Tonight, thousands of protesters remain in downtown D.C., occasionally facing off with police. We have seen many people injured, both protesters and police officers.
A group of people carrying anarchy flags pushed over trash cans and destroyed storefront windows as they swarmed through the streets.
We welcome visitors to our city, but we will not tolerate the destruction of our neighborhoods, and we absolutely will not tolerate violence against our police officers.
But as night fell, protesters lit a bonfire just blocks from the White House.
KKK, no fascist USA!
Closer to home, near Mar-a-Lago, protesters wheeled a coffin to symbolize the death of democracy. And now a familiar scene outside Trump Tower in Chicago, a huge crowd of demonstrators making their voices heard.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear. I hope that does not happen, right? I hope that regardless of who wins, it's peaceful and we do not have to go through that, okay? I hope that we do not see that, okay? But my point is this. In 2016, you saw leftists not only lose their minds on Election Day, but also on Inauguration Day as well, too. Okay. And, you know, hey, these liberal cities have learned from the past and they are preparing just in case Kamala Harris loses. Okay. Best believe. Okay. And what I found to be particularly interesting is how they're not just fencing up the White House and boarding up businesses in DC, but they're also fencing around Kamala Harris's house in DC as well, too. Okay. I guess, I don't know, the leftists will be upset that Kamala Harris didn't beat Trump, right? So I'm not entirely sure. But again, they're not doing it because Trump supporters are going to be in D.C. if Trump loses. That's just not going to happen. They're doing it in anticipation of the left, right? I mean, let's be 100% honest. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Let's start with our very own David Kaplan. He's live in Northwest D.C., where the city is locking down, preparing for whatever may come Tuesday. David, a lot of security measures are already in place, and earlier there are crews working hard behind you.
Yeah, Sierra, definitely. We've covered the sort of fortification of Washington, D.C. leading up to the election and know that this posture is going to sort of continue for a while. We are here at the Naval Observatory right here where Vice President Kamala Harris lives. This is the fencing that has gone up around the perimeter of her home. Crews have been hard at work all afternoon. We've seen them getting this fencing up, obviously in advance of Election Day on Tuesday. Want to show you some video from earlier in this week. We saw a similar situation at the White House. Fox News also learned there would be enhanced security measures ahead of and after the election, particularly around the U.S. Capitol. Officials telling Fox 5 that D.C. residents can expect this enhanced police presence as well for a while, adding that they will prepare for any responses after the election is over. Some businesses near the White House also not taking any chances. We saw some emphasizing they're remaining open but opting to board up their windows as a precaution. Fox 5 speaking with a D.C. resident about all of these security changes happening in the district right now.
Yeah. So again, the easiest prediction that I've ever made, right? That liberal cities will be boarding up in anticipation of Kamala losing, right? And Trump becoming president-elect. They also boarded up in anticipation of the DNC. Now, the narrative for the mainstream liberal media is that, oh, well, Trump supporters are so violent, right? And liberals are so peaceful, okay? But you didn't see this type of stuff at the RNC. And again, they're not doing this because of the threat of violence from Trump supporters. No, they're doing this because the liberals that live in these cities will lose their minds over Trump winning, right? Again, because they've been brainwashed by Democrats in the media to think that Trump is Hitler, right? I mean, just imagine. A lot of these people think that Trump is Hitler, okay? And they're going to react in a way that you expect somebody to react if they really believe that Hitler was just elected president of the United States and that it's the end of democracy, which is what Democrats have said, right? I mean, they've said things like, for example, Trump is going to kill women, right? These are the type of things they've said. Now, again, what does that lead to, right? It leads to chaos and destruction, which, again, I'm hoping doesn't happen. I'm hoping that this is not happening. I'm praying that this does not happen, okay? Regardless of who wins, I don't want to see violence, but just based off history, okay, we know why this is happening. Again, it is not because they think Trump supporters are going to be in the streets in D.C., regardless of how the election goes. But guys, isn't it amazing how when it comes to the border wall, Kamala Harris said that was a vanity project, right? But when it comes to protecting her house in D.C., in herself, oh no, all of a sudden walls work, right? Fences are a good idea when it comes to protecting her house from what could possibly happen on election day if she loses. But when it comes to protecting the country, the southern border, no, that's not a good idea, right? That's a vanity project, right? She can't tell you whether or not it's a good idea to continue to fund the border wall, right? But again, the Democrats that are in power in D.C. think that it's a good idea to put up a wall, a fence around Kamala's home in the White House, right, to protect it. Again, it's just amazing how that works.
I mean, it is sad that it has to come to that. I do understand why a lot of store owners, especially like local businesses, would want to do that. Even outside of the elections, there have been like other instances where like they should have boarded and they didn't. But yeah, it's sad that it's the reality, but I hope that this time it was just a precautionary measure, nothing happens, and then, yeah.
Now, regardless, particularly as we approach the January 6th certification in Congress and leading up to the inauguration, we're told that we can expect to continue seeing these types of precautions in place. In particular, we're told thousands of police officers from across the country will be in the district for those events, specifically in January. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser saying they have been preparing for all of this for months.
Yeah, so I think regardless of who wins, there are going to be challenges, especially if the election is close, right? Either way, okay? In fact, there's a scenario that I want to share with you guys that Ben Shapiro outlined that, in my opinion, I think is the absolute worst case scenario when you talk about rising tensions in this country and the outcome of the election. So without further ado, roll this clip.
The worst case scenario for the country is that the scenario that I laid out a few moments ago turns out to be the actual final scenario, that Trump wins Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada. And he gets to 268. And then Kamala Harris gets to 270. There's one major problem with this. The major problem with this is that the Electoral College count right now is flawed, deeply flawed. If you go back to the 2020 census, what you will find is that the 2020 census radically overcounted citizens in blue states and radically undercounted citizens in red states. This is not speculation. The Census Bureau has acknowledged as much. The Census Bureau has now acknowledged that 14 states had significant miscounts in the 2020 census. Significant miscounts in the 2020 census. We are talking being like 5% off in terms of the population. So why exactly does that matter? Well, the reason that matters is because that is how you allocate both congressional seats and electoral college votes. The states that were undercounted were nearly all red states, and the states that were overcounted were nearly all blue states. This makes a huge difference. Why? Because if the count had been properly done, the state of Florida would have had 2 more electoral college votes. The state of New York would have had 1 fewer electoral college vote. The state of Texas would have had 1 more electoral college vote. In all, somewhere between 7 and 9 electoral college votes would have gone to red states that are currently residing in blue states. Okay, that is just a fact. Okay, and because that is the case, wow. I mean, worst case scenario for the country is that. Worst case scenario for the country is Kamala Harris narrowly wins, and that then opens the door to this question being asked, because it is pretty clear at that point the electoral college count is wrong. I'm just painting a nightmare scenario for all y'all.
Yeah, that is really bad. Okay, that would be a terrible scenario for the country. I guess it would be a good scenario for Trump if he happens to lose in that way, right, where he has 268 electoral votes and Kamala barely has 270, which, by the way, again, is more likely than you think that could happen, because if you look at the map, all it would take for that to happen would be for Trump to win out in the Sun Belt, which he is favored to do so, right? He's favored to win North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, I believe, right now. And for Kamala Harris to win out in the Rust Belt, which would be Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which we know that typically once one of these states goes blue, then all of them are going to go blue, right? So if Kamala Harris happens to win Pennsylvania by a miracle and then ends up winning Michigan and Wisconsin as well too, and Trump wins out in the Sun Belt, that's exactly what it leads to. It leads to that scenario in which Trump would then have to challenge the election on those grounds in order to have a chance of winning. And there's no doubt in my mind that they certainly will, because if the census is wrong, if the census is undercounting votes for Republican states that should count towards their electoral votes, then, I mean, it would make sense to challenge that because the votes are not being allocated properly, right? I mean, that would make sense. And again, this scenario is not unlikely. Like, this scenario could actually happen. In fact, I think that this is the best case scenario for Kamala Harris, right? If Kamala Harris wins, this is probably her best case scenario. And right now, again, the polls are scary close to this, right? The only difference is that the polls have Trump slightly favored in Pennsylvania. That's it, right? So again, this could easily be the scenario. And if this is the scenario, yeah, these next 2 months, it's gonna be rough for the country. It's gonna be really rough for the country. But this should have been fixed ahead of time. To be quite honest with you, this should have been challenged ahead of time, since we know that the census is incorrect, and essentially they've admitted that it's incorrect. This should have been taken care of before, right? So you don't have to go through this, but it seems as if this country is kind of destined for this type of scenario, okay, considering how polarized we have become as a country. So with that being said, hopefully that scenario doesn't happen, okay? And I want to leave you guys with this tidbit here that I think is important, because this memo that was put out by City Councilwoman Vicky Palladino from New York City, I think is right in line with the data and what the data is showing about the likely outcome of the election. And I want to read it because, again, this lines up almost exactly with my analysis that I put out in the last video. And again, this is analysis that I came up with before this even came out. But since this woman put this out and she's claiming that a Democrat consultant told her this, I think it's worth sharing. So let's read here. Just spoke to a Democrat consultant friend on the ground in a swing state who told me I could repeat some of what we discussed. Here is what I can tell you. Take it with a grain of salt if you like, but I think he's being straight with me. Nobody really thinks Kamala's going to win at this point. Canvassing is going poorly almost everywhere with few exceptions. The party is getting their high follower influencer accounts to push out motivational stories just to keep morale up and get them over the finish line with some dignity, but it's not great. The Iowa poll was good to give a shot of adrenaline to volunteers, but nobody important believes those numbers are real. Yeah, I don't think anybody believes those numbers are real. I think that most people kind of know what's going on with that poll, right? That is a hopium poll. And you have the paid influencers of the Democrat Party. They're optimistic as a way to make it seem as if there's actual real enthusiasm on the ground, but there's really not, right? And that shows up in the early voting numbers. So again, we know that Democrat influencers are paid. We know that for a fact. So you can't really believe anything they say. And what they're saying is the exact opposite of what we are seeing when it comes to the early voter turnout for Democrats. Of all the swing states, they're hoping Michigan comes through and possibly a late night miracle in PA, but nobody is counting on either of them, which is right in line with where the poll's at right now. Okay, I think Michigan, if there is a state that Kamala Harris can win at this point, it's probably Michigan, right? That's going to be the state she most likely wins if she does pick up a swing state. They don't think Trump is actually going to flip VA or New Hampshire, but the fact that they've even entered the conversation is indicative of how bad things could potentially turn out. The early vote counts are just beyond what they expected to see for Republican turnout and has Democrat strategists rethinking whether it was a good idea to make such a big push to broaden early voting in the first place. Republican low propensity voters are activated in a way nobody really expected, and the polls didn't capture it. Yes, it's possible those early Republicans broke Democrat in an unprecedented way, but it's very unlikely. Yeah, I mean, I just don't see that either, unless it's a bunch of pro-choice women that are voting Democrat. That's the only way that those early voting Republican numbers don't spell disaster for Democrats, right? You got to hope and pray that most of those voters, who are women, by the way, are pro-choice and they're breaking for Kamala Harris, right? That's the hopium here. The campaign has switched entirely to woman versus man messaging, as liberal white women are the only reliable voter bloc they can even identify at this point. Yeah, that's true, because black voters aren't showing up in North Carolina and Georgia, right? This is why I said that this is extremely important. I definitely believe this because this is 100% in line with the data, right? All the data that we have so far with early voting, this is right in line with that. So this is why I think that this is 100% real. I think this is how Democrats actually feel behind closed doors. Priority now is saving some down ballot races and flipping the House so the night isn't a total embarrassment for Democrats. Like I said, take this all with a grain of salt, as this is secondhand information, but this is what I was told, and I think it tracks with other things we know. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Now, again, you know, this could be a repeat of 2022, and a lot of the copium from Democrats and the hopium is coming from this idea that, oh, well, the red wave didn't happen in 2022 and all of these women turned out and voted in 2022. But people got to understand, it wasn't just women showing out and voted in 2022 right after Roe v. Wade was overturned. So we was in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned, but also GOP turnout was down, right? So you didn't have high GOP turnout. You just had more liberal women that were willing to go out and vote due to Roe v. Wade being overturned. And now we're 2 years into that. I just don't think that that same effect is there, at least not to the same degree that it was right after Roe v. Wade was overturned. So again, I'm seeing a lot of hopium from the leftist talking points citing 2022 as their main reason for why they think that Kamala is underperforming in the polls. And I just don't think it's wise to compare the midterms to a general election. I think they're two different races. I think that the dynamics are different. Trump was not on the ballot in 2022. I think that makes a difference. And I think it's just wiser to compare general elections with general elections and midterms with midterms and not mix the two, because I just think that the dynamics are they're just different, right? In regards to the decision for people to vote, right? A lot of people just sit at home doing midterms. They just don't vote at all. And, you know, I think that's what happened in 2022 with the GOP. And it just so happened that liberal women came out and voted more. And that's why there wasn't a huge red wave. But Republicans still won the 2022 midterms, and liberals tend to forget that. So with what that New York City councilwoman just outlined, right, the way she described the current state of the race from a Democrat that's on the ground, I personally believe that that is how Democrats actually feel behind closed doors. And a lot of what you're seeing in the media right now is just, again, a lot of copium, a lot of hopium, but they all kind of know that it's not looking good for Kamala Harris as of right now. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.